Elijah's eyes fluttered open, the gentle rays of sunlight piercing through the sterile white curtains. The room was a stark contrast to the clinical chamber where he had endured the harrowing procedure. Soft sheets cradled him, and the air smelled fresh, devoid of the metallic tang of machinery. The silence was a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. For a few moments, Elijah lay there, gathering his thoughts. Gone were the crippling tremors that once plagued him, the piercing memories of war and the haunting presence of Legion. It felt as if a weight had been lifted. A dark cloud dispersed. A doctor, clipboard in hand, entered the room. "Ah, you're awake," he remarked, jotting down a note. "How are you feeling, Elijah?" "Different," Elijah murmured, struggling to find the words. "Lighter, somehow." The doctor smiled, a hint of triumph in his eyes. "The procedure was a success. You're free now, free from the chains that once bound you." But as the days went by, it became evident that while the chains of the past had been broken, new ones had taken their place. Elijah's demeanor had certainly improved, but at a cost. The world seemed duller, colors less vibrant, and emotions, once sharp and raw, now felt muted. Fellow patients took notice of his transformation. Whispers filled the hallways, some out of admiration, others from trepidation. Many approached him, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and hope. One evening, a familiar face, James, a soldier who had been in the trenches alongside him, approached. "Elijah," he began, his voice quivering with emotion. "It's really you, isn't it? You've changed." Elijah stared back, searching for memories of their shared experiences, but found only shadows. "I remember. We fought together," he said slowly. James swallowed hard, tears forming in his eyes. "They took part of you away, didn't they? The part that remembered the horrors, the pain. But what else did they take, Elijah?" Elijah struggled with the question. The procedure had removed the trauma, but had it also taken away the essence of who he was? The emotions, the bonds, the shared struggles? "You're different," James continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You might not remember the gore, the violence, or even Legion, but at what cost?" The room fell silent, the weight of James's words hanging heavy. Elijah, once the symbol of strength and resilience, was now a puzzle. Pieces missing, a man rebuilt but not whole. The promise of peace had come at a tremendous price, one that Elijah was only beginning to comprehend. The sanatorium had its schedule, and Elijah tried to adhere to it. Breakfast at 7, therapeutic sessions at 10, and a brief recess in the gardens at noon. The routines were supposed to help him reintegrate, to relearn the motions of daily life. But with each passing day, the veneer of normalcy showed cracks. One morning, as Elijah stood before the ornate mirror in his room, brushing his hair, a flicker caught his attention. The reflection wasn't his. A distorted silhouette, twisted and grotesque, glared back. Heart racing, he blinked, and just as suddenly, his own image resumed. The moment was fleeting, but unmistakable. "Just a trick of the light," he muttered to himself, but uncertainty gnawed at him. The gardens, once a place of solace, now held their own mysteries. As he strolled along the manicured pathways, cold drafts would sweep by, seemingly from nowhere, making the hairs on his neck stand on end. One afternoon, as he paused to admire a rose bush, he noticed its shadow on the ground. Instead of delicate petals and thorns, the shadow formed an ominous, writhing shape, eerily reminiscent of Legion's form. The black tendrils seemed to reach out for him. He stepped back, heart pounding, only to see the shadow revert to its ordinary rosebush form. And then there were the whispers. At night, when the sanatorium plunged into a hushed silence, soft murmurs reached his ears. They were neither menacing nor comforting, just a constant, barely audible undercurrent that kept him on edge. Elijah tried to dismiss these oddities, attributing them to residual effects of the treatment. But one evening, as he sat in the common room reading, another patient, Clara, approached him. Her face was pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and recognition. "You hear them too, don't you?" she whispered, voice quivering. Elijah looked up, taken aback. "Hear what?" "The whispers," Clara responded, leaning closer. "At night. They're not just in our heads, Elijah. They're real." He shuddered. The realization that he wasn't alone in experiencing these disturbances was both comforting and terrifying. The procedure had muted the traumas. But had it also amplified their connection with Legion? Days turned into weeks, and the shadows grew bolder. One night, after the soft murmurs became a cacophony of voices, Elijah found himself drawn to his room's window. The moon cast an ethereal glow, and on the walls of the sanatorium, shadows danced. But these weren't the benign silhouettes of trees or structures. They were grotesque, twisted, and eerily human, a grim tableau of suffering and despair. A cold dread settled in Elijah's heart. The procedure might have sealed away the overt symptoms of his trauma, but the door to Legion, it seemed, was still ajar. The entity was here, watching, waiting, and lurking just beyond the edges of perception. Rain drizzled down, washing over the dark, polished stone of the memorial. As Elijah approached, the weight of the war pressed heavily on his shoulders, each step heavier than the last. Upon the stone were carved names. Names of friends, names of friends, names of enemies, names of the brave men who'd never returned home. He ran his fingers over the cold surface, feeling each name, each groove, as though hoping to connect with the souls behind them. Among them, he found a familiar one. James Freeman. "Great. Grandfather," he murmured, remembering the tales of his family's struggles, how James had been a pillar of strength during his own tumultuous times. It struck Elijah how the cycle of violence and despair had repeated itself in his lineage. A sudden voice broke his reverie. "Takes you back, doesn't it?" Elijah turned to see an old comrade, Captain Marcus, his face lined with years of service and the scars of many battles. Marcus continued, a faraway look in his eyes. "You know, my grandfather used to tell me about the world wars. He'd talk about the price they paid, the sacrifices they made for what they believed was progress." Elijah nodded, and yet here we are, still paying the same price, despite all the advancements and changes. Marcus pointed to the horizon, where the ruins of an old factory stood, a relic from an age of industrialization. "You see that? That's where my grandfather worked after the war. Thought it was a symbol of a brighter future. Now, it's just a testament to the past." The two veterans sat, lost in thought, reflecting on the cost of progress. The world around them had evolved, but the challenges and moral dilemmas remained. The technology of warfare had changed, but the price in blood and tears remained consistent. Elijah clenched his fist, blood oozing out as his nails dug into his palm, a grim reminder of the inner and outer battles he'd fought. Sometimes, I wonder if we ever truly progress or if we just find new ways to inflict pain. Marcus nodded, looking at Elijah's bleeding hand with understanding. Our ancestors, they hoped for a better world for us. We owe it to them, and to the next generation, to keep fighting. Not just wars, but for true progress. So that one day these names carved in stone will serve as a reminder, not of endless conflict, but of the sacrifices made to bring an end to it. As the rain continued to fall, washing away the blood from Elijah's hand, the two men stood together, a united front, bound by shared memories and a hope for a better future.